Welcome. I'm waffling on here. So Wednesday, the 24th of June. We've actually had a pretty, solid week. So far had a bit of a slow day. It was a bit of a scrambling day. Monday, yesterday went smooth. We had two triggers in the morning, GBP USD and Euro USD. And then we didn't have any of the main trades trigger yesterday, but a few of you have asked for some obviously lower time frame trades. So I put those in. Yeah, I put a gold trade in and it absolutely smashed it. So I was really happy. I've been more aggressive today. GBP USD, I'm not gonna lie, it's really pissed me off because I didn't want to drop it any, lower. I probably could have done 3-2 for 50 maybe, but I thought 3-2 100 was going to tap. And if you look at this here, we've been so close to tapping. Uh, how many pips are we away? Yeah, 1.2 pips. And it's just absolutely melted. So. Let's wait and see. Anyway, right, for anyone, new here, all right, make sure note that I do the same things, every single day. So my goal, my kind of difference is that I identify the direction we're going to go before we take that trade. All right. So we're obviously working mainly on the 2 hour time frame. It's an intraday time frame because obviously I'm an intraday trader. Now, you can't be going against the dollar today. This week it's been strong, really strong. As soon as it's broken cleanly through this 101, it retested and now it's pumped up. It's actually cleaned 101 500. There was a part of me that wanted to do a counter trend trade this morning, but you just can't, you just can't. And so, if we're looking at where dollars trending, and if we're looking at if we're going to buy the dollar or if we're going to, sell the dollar, we've got the 50 well above the 200 EMA. That'll be tick number one to buy. We've got the actual dollar trend, tick number two to buy. If we look at yields here, if we look at where they were struggling to trade last week as opposed to they're struggling to trade this week. So this was obviously the last week here, and obviously this is this week here. So the kind of highs of last week is struggling. A bit like what we're doing here. So yields, if we're looking at these on a higher time frame, you can't look to sell because we are trending to the upside here. So that would be for me. If I go back here, that will be tick number three. Stock markets kind of break even. Oil starting to drop, but obviously, yes, money is flowing into the dollar. It's not really flowing anywhere else. So that would be my kind of checklist here as to why we would look to buy here. So I'm pretty happy. Again, Aussie, I didn't really, like it. It hasn't been trending clean. It went straight down yesterday. Pound, I mean, this is I mean, look, I'm going to take the positives. All right. We've again got the direction right. Our zone has just been slightly out. You can see these highs here. All right. These previous highs. Now, what happens in, London? Probably 70% of the time, we'll clear these highs to introduce obviously amateur buyers into the market because everyone's like, right, if we break through here, we've broken through. If you look at this on a 5 minute, we've broken through here. What's everyone doing? They're going to be buying here. Now, what ends up happening then? All right. We obviously have this major, sell off, and obviously we would be very happy if we'd have just gone 1.2 pips higher, 20, 30 pips. That'd be TP1 smash. But you got to take the positives here. All right. Yes, our trade hasn't triggered. You guys know that I am completely different to everybody else. I don't enter as, price happens. I want price to come up into our, zone. Um, and obviously if we're drifting up into this, zone here, everything has a daily range, so we're almost taking 20 to 30 pips off of this to then, melt obviously to the downsides. So, the only positive to take a bit like yesterday, yes, it's not triggered, but we're in the right direction. So it means that our analysis and outlooks on point. Same with Euro here, wasn't even close. I thought I played this one a bit tighter. So I was looking at this area of liquidity here, and I was expecting price to at least come in and test this area. So this afternoon, I might even tighten it a little bit, more. Gold, we've obviously had that trigger, trigger number one. Remember, I trade aggressive, so we trade one, two, three positions. This is the precision entry here. All right. So I'm pretty happy with this one here. In a bit of profit. So that's obviously what we like to kind of look at as we're trading here, so hoping for this to melt down to at least TP one. Where have I put TP one? Let me just have a look here. So it was 4067. So 4067 would be something about here. All right, that's the kind of angle we're looking at for TP1 here. But yeah, we'll obviously wait and see what happens. I had a trade on USDJPY, but I've kind of stayed out of it. I probably should have entered it because it would have triggered. Um, it would have been very, very, nicer. I think my entry was actually about here. So. Yeah, let's wait and see. Probably regret not entering that one because obviously, again, look how wild USDJPY is acting. Yen has these aggressive, spikes to the downside. We don't have any of these candles to the upside. I keep going over this. They're only to the downside. Aggressive wicks here, and then we get this continuation. But obviously, I didn't want to, I prefer GBP USD, Euro USD, and gold. So yeah, let's wait and see. Obviously, what's happens here. Hoping for gold to drift down into this TP1 area. I'm going to be holding. So yeah, let's wait and see how that one plays out. Right, does anyone have any questions? Any questions at all? I am happy to answer. Remember what we're doing here. We've obviously identified direction by looking at the dollar yields, stock markets. All right, so we're understanding obviously what the highest probability direction is. All right, and then two, we are understanding, yeah, kind of where money is flowing, and obviously the higher the yields trade. I think yields have to, for us to see a weaker dollar, they've got to break through here. They've got to break through these, lows of this week. But obviously yields have been acting pretty wild actually. But obviously we are, dependent on, what kind of news is not so much news, more politics. What kind of rubbish is going to come out? It's been relatively quiet. So yeah, let's wait and see obviously what happens. But gold here, I'm pretty happy. Just want this to continue to the downside here. And then yeah, probably come out at TP1. That is, my kind of target here. So yeah, that's what we're kind of looking at. If there's no questions, what I will do. Say if I do another NZD, so, you know, let's mark this one up here. All right, what we are looking at here. So, price, we've already identified, we want to obviously trade to the downside here. I mean, my entry, my kind of areas I'll be looking out for, one would be here. All right. Probably next one I would have is a little bit, probably a little bit higher up. So I'll be here. You can see here prices struggle to break through. If we go down on a 15 minute, prices come into this area. It's slow, struggle to break through. As soon as it breaks through, comes up, retests, goes down to the next zone. You know, tries to break through, comes down to the next zone here. So obviously, once we've broken through, our ideal goal is for obviously price to come up. Now, even this one probably wouldn't have triggered. If we look at this on a two hour time frame, mine would have been at the bottom of this wick here. So we would have had a very, very similar scenario to NZD USD here, in regards to that would have been our first entry. Probably stops would have been above here. And obviously take profit would have been 1 to 2, so something like this, right? But we would have had exactly the same thing happen. So if I clone this, clone and clone, our three entries, if we were trading aggressively, would have looked like this. So if I move everything down, down, we go, and down and down. All right. Those would have been our three entries here. Now, the number one wouldn't have triggered, but obviously we've got the direction correct. And as you can see, it's relatively easy, to kind of get direction. So, Alex, could you please mark up USD CAD? So, USD CAD is slightly different. All right, just because of so they've got one of the largest holdings of oil in the world. I think Canada is number four because obviously they use a lot of it, little bit like Japan. So kind of a weaker oil price with Canada. It's really gonna affect the Canadian dollar, and obviously that's why we've seen this week, huge moves to the upside here. Also, CAD is one of the slowest moving pairs in the FX industry. So I would have probably had mine here. So I would have had an entry here. You could have probably also had an entry here, all right, or a zone here. So these would have been my two kind of entry zones here. If we go on the 15-minute time frame, I would have probably price would have been around 6 o'clock would have been here. So I would have probably been looking, if I look on a 2 hour, I would have probably been looking potentially this kind of zone here. So what would that be? Let's have a look here. So we'd have been looking at potentially 4,150 and say 2,000 something. No, potentially, no, let's go 2,050. 2,050. There we go. So probably something a bit like this. So yeah, if we'd have gone for something like this, we obviously would have triggered. But take note how many pips this is, right? 10 pip move on this one. GBP USD has had a what's that, about a 30 pip, move on that one. So that's why I tend to, stay away from CAD. There'd be no reason to try and obviously, sell this. But CAD tends to consolidate quite a lot, break out, so it ends up doing something like this where it'll go boom and then it will stay here for ages and then it'll go boom, and then it'll stay here for ages. It's a lot slower, right? There's a lot the consolidation strategy that I've got works really well on CAD. So for example, you might have had this area of consolidation marked out here. Soon as we're breaking out, we're obviously looking for a retest. So if we were to add in this area of consolidation here, all right. As soon as we break out, we're obviously looking for a retest here. Stops would have had to be minimum here, and then you're looking for your 1 to 2. But you can see here, this is our consolidation here. All right, all of this price action here. As soon as we break out, we're looking for one read test into this kind of area, you enter, and then obviously we should see this continue to the upside. But obviously your TP1 might have been here, TP2 might have been here, TP3 might have been here. So here you might be planning stops to break even, and then obviously, continuing on from there. So obviously that's what we're looking at here. Gold kind of struggling a bit. I want this to break through, but it's been a bit like it. So iPhone 6, please, how do you know a trend is coming to an end? I mean, you don't, that's obviously the question, but that's why I'd always recommend to everyone about trading different times. So yesterday we did pretty well here. So Wednesday, if I go on a 15-minute time frame here, yesterday was Wednesday. Sorry, it was here. So Tuesday, there we go. So on gold, we were looking for it was Tuesday yesterday, wasn't it? Why can't I find where we were? Yeah. So yeah, that was it. So I think our entry, and I'll just draw it out like this. So our entry on gold yesterday was about here. All right, we didn't trigger. It was pretty obvious because of yields that price was going to come to the downside here. So I actually did, a lower time frame trade afterwards, and it was pretty much, spot on. I think our entry zone was about here. Took it. I think I did come out here, but obviously wish I'd have held and continued because it went on and obviously hit TP2. But obviously, yeah, that's I kind of identified yesterday because you know you're you're always going to have a bit like GBP USD here where price, we've obviously struggled to draw a straight line. Struggled to break these highs during Asia, but then London Open, you have a complete spike out here, so it changes everyone's minds or changing majority of minds, and then this candle here just swallows up everyone's liquidity. All right, so what I would be doing. Say for example, I was in this GBP trade here. We've breached this, low here, this previous low here, and then I'd be marking up this area here, all right, because this might be potential resistance number two. All right, so if we tend to like, weigh our and price does something like this where it's and then it spikes and it comes straight back up again, you can kind of identify that there's not as many sellers in the market as there was initially, so lots of times it's safer to come out. However, what I've noticed over the last week and a half is we're getting something a bit like this, and then price looks like it's going to come up and then it tails off really really quickly. So I'm going to hold a bit longer than obviously what I have been. I think this war that's happening since March, even I've been conditioned, which I'm slowly training out of me to, take obviously, I've been obviously taking what I can where I can. We've been doing pretty well with direction, but obviously, I've really felt since this agreement's happened, we've been on point, a lot more than we haven't. So yeah, that's obviously one thing that I've been a lot more confident on. So yeah, that's obviously we'll wait and see what happens. But no, I'm pretty happy. Gold starting to break lower. I mean, I'm really, really happy here. Even if this is the only trade of the day, I probably want this to break through to about here. So this wick here, and then I'd probably pull stops to break even, and obviously let that trade run. But I'm aware that we might see something like this happen because it's happened a few times on gold recently, where it's popped down slightly pretty quick, it's stopped, it's then come back and retested and then come to the downside. So yeah, that's what I'm looking at here. Um, Yeah. Any more for any more? Happy to answer any more questions. Otherwise, we will end it here. Really, really appreciate everyone hopping on. Remember, you can ask me anything. That is the difference between, me and everybody else. Is obviously I've been through everything. I've tried it, every strategy. I do feel that it's great for everyone to understand everything because our eyes are all completely different. We can obviously all see charts, time frames slightly different, and obviously your personality plays a big part in that. But I do think it doesn't matter what time frame you use, even if you identify, which direction you want to go down. These are all things that you should, utilize whatever strategy you have. Macros is going to give you a huge advantage, and obviously I've tried to simplify it as much as I possibly can. So yeah, but all, but also from Friday, I'm gonna have a lot more time because my partner goes home. Yeah, I'm free to obviously make any kind of videos. I'm gonna make some YouTube videos. I might do some lifestyle stuff as well. To obviously show what I've been up to. But obviously, I'm not that interesting, so that's why I don't I don't post much lifestyle stuff. But no, so no, have a great Wednesday, and yeah, let's smash it. Hopefully, everyone's in on gold and doing very, very well. So let's go, team. Let's go. Have a good one.